Hey guys, my name is Kayla Wood, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about non-governmental organizations' role in disasters and disaster management. So first off, NGOs have a really positive role in disaster management, and their goals are frankly the same as the government in a general standpoint. They want to save lives, save livelihoods, limit the psychological and physical damage of catastrophic events, and also make recovery the easiest for the government and for survivors. But we also see that NGOs fulfill a very specific purpose where the government is fulfilling a more general purpose. Specifically, NGOs are service providers, so they're providing food, water, medical items, service, shelters, things like that the government might not be specifically involved in, but are still providing at some sort of level. And when these service providers are providing something very specific, we lead to coordination problems with the government, which is where a lot of the negatives of NGOs tend to arise from. If they're not coordinating well with the government and the government isn't coordinating well with NGOs, then we see disparities. And we can look towards 3 specific case studies, one of which we've already talked about in class, to see where these disparities have been overcome, but also to see where they've been prevalent. So first, I want to talk about Hurricane Katrina, where non-governmental organizations, including faith-based organizations, have become more important than ever before in situations like this, because they were flexible and ready to give short-term assistance to survivors, which the government was unprepared for at the time. But even though these NGOs were prevalent in getting survivors to where they expected to be, we also saw that there were some coordination problems there, mostly because the NGOs at the time believed that the government wasn't focusing on the human recovery aspect, was focusing more on the economic recovery aspect. And this left a lot of NGOs and survivors to feel a little bit burnt by the government, which we saw in our case study as well. We can also move to 2017 with Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico to see how NGOs have developed since Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana. And we can see that NGOs have definitely operated more as a partnership with the government, which is improvement and great, but there is also some coordination problems there as well. So first, the NGOs that were primarily involved in Puerto Rico were All Hands Volunteers, which provided an immediate response team to the island, the American Red Cross, which provided a lot of medical supplies, food, water, and shelters, before lastly AmeriCares, which is an organization that specializes in medical response and antibiotic supplies, which were desperately needed at the island of Puerto Rico when Hurricane Maria hit. But what we saw is that these NGOs were providing resources that the government wasn't able to at the time, but had really no way to get them there, and they expected the government to do so. But FEMA told these organizations that they don't transport collected donations. So these NGOs felt, frankly, burnt by the government and had to find other ways to transport things to an island that was very hard to get transportation to. Lastly, we can look outside of the United States to see how NGOs are also operating on an international level, but frankly, just anywhere other than the United States too. And that's with the BAM earthquake in Iran in 2003. Where we saw that the government was facing a major problem, which is what happens when children are affected by natural disasters, because they're affected just as much as anyone else, and perhaps are even more vulnerable. And the Iranian government realized that they had no evidence of government procedures in this instance, and didn't know how to put these principles into practice. So NGOs actually had a really important role in helping fix that in the BAM earthquake, where they were able to include financial assistance, arrange educational and extracurricular activities, as well as psychosocial support for these children. And we're not saying that this is a perfect approach and the United States should completely adopt it, but what we're seeing is that maybe we aren't doing this perfectly. So ultimately, NGOs do play a fantastic role for disaster management, but it's not perfect yet. It can still be improved through better coordination, better transportation, and ultimately just making sure everyone's on the same page. Because, like I said earlier, NGOs and the government have the same goal in mind. They're trying to save lives and save people's livelihoods. But we need to make sure they're coordinated in that effort, so that way everyone does end up being saved, and we don't make any mistakes we don't need to. Thanks, guys, for watching.